Just hours left this Monday night in the race for the White House. The last-minute pitches, the power Hispanic voters hold.
And it changed my son's mind to vote.
And why some voters on the religious right are losing faith in Donald Trump. Plus, what another round of Trump tariffs could mean for Canada.
It will be very difficult.
Alberta's premier fired up over new rules to reduce greenhouse gases.
I'm pissed.
What Canada's oil and gas producers say they'll be forced to do. And the loss of a hero who guided Canada's long road to reconciliation.
Canada lost a giant.
The tributes for trailblazing Indigenous leader Murray Sinclair.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from Washington.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. They are in the final sprint. Months of campaigning in this U.S. presidential election is finally coming to a close. And both parties know half the country will be unhappy, even angry, about the results. The two candidates are spending the day in marathon dueling rallies. Former Vice President Kamala Harris laser focused on the must-win state of Pennsylvania. Her team cheering the news that Harris has apparently taken a marginal lead in several swing states. Former President Donald Trump is heading to 3 states today, hoping to convince the few undecided voters he is their man. We have team coverage tonight, including from Florida and that critical swing state of Pennsylvania. We begin tonight with Jackson Proskow here in Washington.
On this final day, the candidates pushed hard across the swing states.
Get out and vote.
Donald Trump played defense in North Carolina before pushing into Pennsylvania and Michigan.
I hate the expression, actually, but it's ours to lose. Does that make sense to you? It's ours to lose. If we get everybody out and vote, there's not a thing they can do.
We're ready to get out the vote!
Kamala Harris hunkered down with multiple events in Pennsylvania. A win here would all but guarantee her victory.
When you love something, you fight for it.
At this late hour, some polls have started to break slightly in Harris's favor. A Marist survey found the vice president with a 4-point lead nationally, after a stunning weekend poll showed her leading in Iowa, not considered a battleground.
I'm very conscious that something could happen later this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow, that would change the shape of the election. We've seen it happen already.
All of it points to a race that is still very much a coin toss. More than 78 million Americans have already voted. Nearly that many are expected to turn out on Election Day. As a nervous nation waits, election officials are urging patience.
Well, I know in Georgia we're going to have a free, fair, and fast election.
In Georgia, officials say they'll know the majority of the results early Tuesday, but if the margins are as razor thin as expected, it could take days to know the winner.
Jackson Proskow is with me now. Jackson, sometimes at these last rallies, you can get a sense of the enthusiasm and the turnout and what that might mean for the potential outcome. No guarantees, of course, but what's your sense of these rallies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 ways of reading the tea leaves. One is to look at the rallies themselves, where the crowds for Donald Trump are certainly starting to dwindle. It's something we've seen at almost every single rally in the last few days. Lots of empty seats, whereas Kamala Harris's rallies have been packed. They almost feel like the original Donald Trump rallies from back in 2016. The other thing is some of the underlying poll data, and Donna, it shows that Kamala Harris is gaining trust on her ability to handle the economy. She has closed that gap with Donald Trump. She's also bringing more men into the fold, closing the gender gap there as well. Both those things very positive for her.
All right. Jackson Proskow, thank you. No group in this country is a monolith, and no one knows how voters will lean. But in the must-win state of Pennsylvania, there are signs Latino voters are leaning towards Kamala Harris and turning away from Trump because of those derogatory comments made about Puerto Rico at one of his rallies. Neetu Garcha reports from Allentown, Pennsylvania tonight.
Y que somos un poder político.
Victor Martinez says his radio station has 250,000 Latino listeners across Pennsylvania.
Vamos a llamar en vivo.
They've been calling in droves, angry over a comedian's comments at Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally.
There's literally a floating island of garbage. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Mr. Trump and his comedian called us garbage. We are Puerto Ricans. That is the only thing that changed my mind on Trump.
I can't imagine it's a big deal. I've done more for Puerto Rico than any president.
What's the big deal? That's why I And I will say millions of Puerto Ricans are so upset.
We need to take it for what it is. It was a joke.
Supporters like Marcela Diaz-Myers, though, believe Donald Trump is the candidate with the best policies and support for all Americans. She's a longtime believer, going so far as to volunteer as a pro-Trump state elector in 2020, sometimes called fake electors during the effort to overturn that presidential election.
Would you sign up to be a fake elector once again?
So I wouldn't call it fake elector. I would call it an elector that made the decision of putting her signature where it needed to be in order to be sure that if the election was going in a different direction, it would be legit.
Would you do it again?
Absolutely.
And I'd like to start by expressing my love for the island and people of Puerto Rico.
Tim Ramos, who spoke at a Trump rally here last week, agrees.
We need to be able to put food on the table, take care of our families, and the one who's going to do that is Donald Trump.
In Philadelphia's Little Haiti neighborhood, a stark contrast. People tell us they feel threatened by the rhetoric aimed at their community, including eating pets.
These things really put people's lives in danger. They're just not mean-spirited and false, but they have drastic implications. I mean, when we talk to our brothers and sisters in Ohio, Springfield, for example, there are bomb threats.
Victor Martinez signs off on election eve before going to the Harris rally in Allentown. He says enthusiasm there is a sign of how Puerto Ricans like him could be the ones to decide this election.
Before closing out the campaign, Kamala Harris is directing messages toward the Latino community. Here in Allentown, the population is more than half Hispanic. A majority are Puerto Rican. Donna?
Neetu Garcha in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Thanks, Neetu. Donald Trump won in 2016 in part because of support from evangelical Christians, in particular white Christian nationalists. And he's courted them again in this campaign. But now that he's a convicted felon and after some of the many lies and outrageous things he has said, there are signs some of those once loyal to Trump are losing faith. Jeff Semple reports from Trump's home state of Florida.
Election eve in Trump country.
Who are you voting for?
Trump. Absolutely.
Donald Trump's home state of Florida. Its population is mostly white, Republican, and Christian.
And if you're a Christian, you cannot vote for a Democratic, the Democrats, because for one, they're for abortion.
Most important is, out of the two, who believes in God is President Trump.
In fact, both candidates say they believe in God, but polls show white Christians overwhelmingly support Trump. And many credit divine intervention with saving him from that would-be assassin.
They shoot him in the ear because they couldn't shoot him in the face, so that's divine.
In 2020, Trump won 80% of the white evangelical vote. But there are signs this time of some possible cracks in that base.
At this Florida evangelical church, they're singing a different tune.
A lot of Christians in the U.S. Have really let themselves be manipulated.
Pastor Sarah Robinson says after years of moral and legal scandals, some Christians are losing faith in Trump.
There's nothing that man's campaign speaks of or evidences that speaks to me of the heart of Jesus.
It takes some measure of courage for people to break with the community that they're a part of, and that hadn't happened in my judgment nearly enough.
Pete Wehner worked for 3 Republican presidents, from Reagan to Bush. He's voting for Harris.
Even though I walk.
Opinion polls suggest some evangelicals no longer plan to vote at all after Trump softened his opposition to abortion.
It was very devastating because so many people feel, politically homeless already, and they feel as if they don't have a party that represents them.
Harris, meanwhile, faces a similar challenge with her own base, with polls suggesting a softening in support from black voters. The awkward question that could decide the election, Donna: will more voters of color move towards Trump than white voters abandon him?
Jeff Semple in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thanks, Jeff. Before the polling booths even open tomorrow, Republicans are already launching multiple lawsuits challenging the electoral process. Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed, falsely, that the 2020 election was stolen and appears to be priming his base to reject the outcome if he loses this time. Mike Armstrong is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania tonight, a county where Trump says election officials are already cheating.
You didn't have to buy a new sign this year.
No, I'm using 2016. Just had to change 2 letters.
Chris Kinney is confident in his candidate, not just in Donald Trump's chances of winning.
Look what's going on in your state.
He also trusts Trump's allegations that Democrats are cheating.
And then they accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist. He's a conspiracy.
Trump just brings it to light because he's smart enough to know that it should be set up different to where everybody does trust it.
It's a dangerous game, I think, really.
Stephen Medvick teaches political science at the local university.
There's bad stuff going on.
He says Trump's repeated and unfounded accusations of cheating are a strategy. He's discrediting the election so that if he loses, he can claim it was stolen.
And we're leading in all the polls. We should get elected, but remember this, they cheat like hell.
When political leadership is saying elections are rigged or elections are stolen, you sort of can't blame people for coming to that conclusion. I mean, they trust the messenger.
The handwriting, the signatures.
Now, there are investigations in some Pennsylvania counties into fraudulent voter registrations. In fact, they were found shows the system worked, but Trump still pushes it as proof his opponents are cheating.
The thing they're best at is cheating on elections, so we have to be very careful. That's about the only thing.
What I don't want to do is set a precedent.
Another place where allegations of cheating could have an impact is locally. Dozens of people who've promoted unsubstantiated allegations in the past now sit on county election boards in swing states and could delay or even deny the certification of results.
This could really be problematic, and I think we're not really prepared for how widespread it might be.
There is an erosion underway in this country. Constant questioning of the integrity of the electoral system damages public confidence. They say democracy dies in darkness. It may also die in distrust. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
It all happens tomorrow, and we will have live coverage of America Votes, a Canadian perspective on this historic election. We'll be streaming live beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, wherever you watch Global News, including BC One, globalnews.ca, YouTube, the Global TV app, Pluto TV, and Prime. The goal to slash greenhouse gas emissions. Coming up, Ottawa's new rules and the Alberta Premier's angry reaction. The federal government is introducing new rules intended to prompt Canada's oil and gas sector to cut greenhouse gas emissions. There are only draft regulations at this point, but as David Akin explains, the plan is already straining Ottawa's relationship with Alberta.
And it's also a form of insurance.
Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says it's a matter of fairness.
Every sector must do its part. Oil and gas companies are no exception.
Guilbeault wants oil and gas producers to cut emissions by 35% compared to 2019 and to do that by 2032. Ottawa believes the sector can achieve those reductions by using existing technology, which would allow companies to continue to increase production. A furious Alberta Premier disagrees.
I'm pissed. I'm absolutely angry.
Danielle Smith, along with several business groups and some producers, said Ottawa is imposing a de facto cap on production, not emissions.
We will not stand idly by while Justin Trudeau sacrifices our prosperity, our Constitution, and our quality of life for his extreme agenda.
Smith vowed to fight it in court. Meanwhile, her government is already spending $7 million on an Axe the Cap advertising campaign, a campaign Guilbeault described as disinformation.
They will continue doing stupid things, and we will continue focusing on helping Canadians.
But these regulations will not go into effect until 2026, and that, of course, is after the next scheduled federal election. And that's an election that right now the Conservatives appear likely to win. And while Pierre Poilievre has not yet outlined his plan to deal with climate change, he has signaled he would scrap Guilbeault's plan. Donna?
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Next, my conversation with Canada's ambassador to the U.S. ahead of a pivotal election for our country's powerful neighbor. Every U.S. presidential election, we're reminded that this country is not only Canada's much bigger neighbor, it is our biggest trading partner. We have a stake in the outcome of this election, too. And one of the candidates is sending a strong signal about what he intends to do.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff.
and it's my favorite word.
Trump loves tariffs. He says he'll impose 10 to 20% tariffs on all of America's trading partners if he wins. Earlier today, I spoke with Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman. There has not been a U.S. election quite like this one, where one of the candidates has refused to accept the results of the last election and is sowing seeds of doubt about the integrity of the one that hasn't even finished yet. What do you make of it?
Well, I think, the United States political environment is, as everyone sees, it's quite passionate, it's quite busy these days. And I think that we just have to wait and see how this all comes out.
Busy is an interesting way of putting it. Very diplomatic. I mean, the country is, by a lot of people's estimation, never been more divided.
My experience in traveling around this country and spending a lot of time, outside of Washington, New York, LA, and very Republican parts of this country, is that what they care about is the same kinds of things that Democrats care about in places like California and Washington State. They care about the things that touch their lives. So I actually don't find that at a local level, when you're talking to people, partisanship is such a big deal.
You think there's more common ground?
There is a lot more common ground.
We don't know the outcome, of course, but we know what Donald Trump has said he will do. He has said that tariffs is his favorite word, and that he has said he will put in a minimum of 10% tariffs on, it seems, everything. Hard to know, but what would that do to Canada?
It would be very difficult for Canada. We have almost $1 trillion in bilateral trade with the Americans every year. So what it's going to do for us is raise prices of our products being sold into the United States, and that isn't good for our businesses that are selling into the United States. But you know what? It's really not good for Americans either. But we have just spent the last 9 months going around the country talking to Republicans, his allies, explaining in specific states and communities what a 10% tariff on Canadian products could mean for them. And what would happen if we enter into a bit of a tariff tit for tat with the Americans. And so if we find ourselves in a situation where the former president is back in the White House, where he is eager to put this policy in place vis-a-vis Canada, we have a number of allies who are going to be able to say to him, you know what, when it comes to Canada, not sure that really makes that much sense. We're ready for the conversation, and that's what's important.
And if Kamala Harris is the winner of this election, does that make a transition a little easier in that you have already had 4 years of dealing with the Biden administration?
I think that's right. Just to say, we know this is kind of a unique feature of this particular election. We know the Trump team, we know President Trump, we know the people around him, and we worked with them before, but we've kept up those relationships ever since. And then if we turn to Vice President Harris, of course, we work with her all the time. I have seen her many times here in Washington at events that she has been hosting and has invited Canada to. So we know her and her team very well. So we're kind of have all our bases covered in terms of knowing the individuals and just making sure we keep those relationships strong and effective.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next, remembering the trailblazing Indigenous leader, Murray Sinclair. That is just one piece of the astonishing musical legacy Quincy Jones leaves behind. Jones, known as Q, was a titan of the music industry, shaping the sound of jazz and pop during his legendary career. He worked with Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles, Amy Winehouse, Will Smith, and hundreds of other artists. His publicist says he died Sunday night surrounded by family at his home in Los Angeles. Quincy Jones was 91 years old. And tributes are pouring in from across Canada for a man who dedicated his life to championing Indigenous rights. Murray Sinclair was Manitoba's first Indigenous judge and was a former senator. He's also chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As Heather Urix West reports, the 73-year-old died this morning, surrounded by family.
Outside the Manitoba legislature, Murray Sinclair is being remembered for a lifetime of service, a sacred fire burning nearby to help guide his spirit home. Murray Sinclair raised by residential school survivors, his grandparents in Selkirk, Manitoba, before going to law school and becoming Manitoba's first Indigenous judge and later a senator.
With the Honourable Murray Sinclair's passing today, Canada lost a giant. His commitment to Indigenous peoples and to all Canadians was absolutely extraordinary, and he will be missed.
As chair of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Sinclair illuminated Canada's long-hidden shame, a cultural genocide perpetuated by Canada's government and churches that saw 150,000 Indigenous children taken from their families and placed in residential schools.
Ours was a commission like no other.
Over the 6-year mission, the commission heard testimony from 7,000 survivors, voices unheard for too long. Sinclair's final report and its 94 calls to action representing a new benchmark for Canada. The discovery and acknowledgement of so many unmarked graves years later, a grim reminder the work of truth and reconciliation does not end.
We did what we could, but it was not anywhere near what we needed to accomplish and needed to investigate. And now we're beginning to see evidence of the numbers of children who died.
News of his passing has inspired tributes nationally. He always walked into dark places with a flashlight so we could safely follow, said Cindy Blackstock, the Indigenous children's advocate. Governor General Mary Simon, too, remembering Sinclair for his exceptional ability to inspire people and to touch hearts. Murray Sinclair was a giant of reconciliation. He will be remembered for charting a course toward truth and a path toward justice.
That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. We will be back from Washington, D.C. tomorrow, Election Day in America. For now, good night.